follow your bliss, whatever that might be, whatever it takes to figure that out. If it takes an hour, a day, a week, a month, or a year, whatever you need to do, whether it's mindfulness, meditation, whatever you need to do to figure out what that bliss is, find it. And to the extent that you can, with everything that's in your being, follow it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Webdelics podcast, where we're on a journey to find out the truth about plant medicines, get rid of the myths, and change the narrative. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and with us today is Webdelics' very own Mike Mumola. Mike, it's good to see you. Now, Mike, I'm going to read your bio. I'm a little bit intimidated reading it. It is so impressive, but it's always fun to talk about and share the bios of these guests who have lived such rich and full lives. And in your cases, we're going to delve into a lot more deeply. There truly is a lot behind this bio. So, Mike is an attorney, a serial entrepreneur, an angel investor, a public speaker, a personal business coach, as well as a mentor. He is also, right now, in his, what is surely best role ever in his entire life, Chief Strategy Officer here at Webdelics. Mike has an extensive history of working with experts around the world on psychedelics, plant/sacred medicines, and alternative methods of mental wellness. His investments focus heavily on psychedelics, depression, PTSD, addiction, and other mental health issues. Mike also sits on the board of Man Cave Health, a charity focused on prostate cancer awareness and treatment, as well as AIR, Attitudes in Reverse, which focuses on adolescent mental health and suicide prevention. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here, Scott. Nice to see you.
It is really exciting. Now, we have a lot in common, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we have professionally in common, but I've got to say, I just love it when the universe works synergistically. And one thing that we have in common is one of the best books that I think both of us have ever read. In my case, it was The Surrender Experiment. And I think that and by the way, The Surrender Experiment was written by a founder of WebMD, and Webdelics is the WebMD of psychedelics, kind of. What?
Some synergies there. Yeah, it was actually acquired. So Michael, quote, Mickey Singer wrote the, as you know, The Surrender Experiment and The Untethered Soul. Early purchase by WebMD. So kind of like brought in all of the technology early on that he had come up with. And, if you believe in coincidences, this is one of those, or universal alignment. Just by chance, I happen to be here talking to you about the WebMD of Psychedelics, Webdelics, while I'm sitting on Michael Singer's property here in Florida, going in after this podcast to a session with him and some of the people. So the timing is really interesting and beautiful.
It truly is. I love things like that. I just can't help it.
Yeah.
We have some other things in common besides that. Well, let's just talk about those for a minute. Look, I don't know if I can believe it myself sometimes. And when people tell me that they don't believe it, I'm always grateful that they don't believe it. I was a practicing attorney for many years. Yes.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And I just read in your bio that you were a practicing attorney. You are an attorney. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I went to law school. I found my way through college, went to law school, wanted to be initially and originally an entertainment lawyer because I wanted to help musicians with what I perceived to be them being taken advantage of by the industry. And some of the technology and opportunities didn't exist that exist now. And so we did that for a little bit. And then I ultimately went back to New Jersey, where I'm from, and became the founding partner of a law firm that's still thriving today, practiced for the better part of almost 2 decades as a trial attorney in various departments and various types of law, and built out that firm, and in many ways began a spiritual journey, which led me to physically where I am today and professionally where I am today, which is so much a part of what we're doing with Webdelics and the people that are a part of it.
So true. By way of framing the conversation from here on out a little bit, the general subject of today's episode is going to be psychedelics and professional freedom. And I really felt that this was an important topic to discuss because, particularly for attorneys, but also a lot of other folks who end up in these careers that seem on the outside so glamorous and so prestigious, that are high paying in many cases, certainly carry a lot of social capital. The treasure in the chest at the end of the rainbow isn't always quite what it seems. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I practiced for over 20 years, and I went into it thinking, oh my God, this is going to be so glamorous. It's going to be so exciting. I'm going to be so rich. I'm going to be so happy and all this, that, and the other. And it ended up breaking my spirit. Is that anything that you can relate to at all? Was the experience of being a lawyer what you thought it would be when you first got in? Talk to me a little bit about how it was and if it wasn't.
Yeah, no. And, for me, life, I guess, guided me there in many ways. I started early. My mother was, single mother, worked 3 jobs to raise my sister and I. So we weren't poor, but we absolutely weren't rich. And so she struggled and we struggled. And so in my mind, money was always the answer. And if I had that, then I had everything I needed. And so I found my way, like I said, into college, and this perception of becoming an attorney is going to make me a lot of money, and then I'll be successful, and then I'll be happy, and all my questions are answered. And so that's what I did. And it's exactly like you said. I started to do all of those things, and I built out a firm, and we did make a lot of money, and the firm still does make a lot of money. And so it was that pivotal moment when I really, recognized that not only, number one, and this is something else, that I was financially illiterate. So many people come out of these graduate schools and don't understand really financially the difference between liabilities and assets and what to do with this money. Like professional athletes, once you get it, what are you spending it on? And so I started to find as time went on that not only was money not necessarily the answer, it was probably one leg on the chair, but the other 3 were just as important, if not more important. And that started to become heavier and heavier on my soul, if I had to be completely honest. And the things that I was doing didn't necessarily resonate with me. And it's one of those, like, what do you do if you spend a decade climbing a mountain and you get to the top of the mountain and you look around and you realize you're on the wrong mountain? Well, you go climb another mountain. And so that's what I did. And so you're absolutely right. And the more I started to be honest to myself and to others that I knew, especially a lot of other attorneys and professionals, the more they were willing to confide in me that they perhaps weren't necessarily happy with what they were doing, but they didn't know anything else. They didn't have any other answers. They didn't have any other options. So like, what were they going to do? And so I started to see it as my life's mission to figure out like how I can get the answers that I needed to lead a truly successful life, meaning a pure and wholesome and happy and fulfilled, purpose-driven, successful life, and then to start sharing that with others.
There is so much in what you said that I not only can personally relate to, but I think so many people across the board can relate to. The wording, professional freedom, it is, to me, important because so many times when you are focused on what you perceive the outcome of your career choices to be, you really do end up trapped on that wrong mountain. And Mike, the other thing I've got to say about this, look, I took accounting for attorneys when I was in law school. I dropped that class once I realized I was probably going to get an F. So better to save my GPA and focus on the things I was kind of good at. And so I can totally relate. You think you're going to have money. Money isn't the solution. It is, especially if you don't have that basic fundamental financial literacy. But it is not a solution also to being on the top of that mountain. And so I have to ask you, did something specific happen that led you to wake up one day and realize I'm at this summit and it is cold here? Or was it more gradual?
Cold and lonely. Cold and lonely. and I want to take a pause to emphasize, because for me, that was really what allowed it to set in. Because, as an attorney specifically, and in many other professions, when you're the alpha, it's not okay to go to others, to not be okay, right? You're the one that's providing the answers, the guidance, the leadership for everyone who needs it with the most trying times of their lives, the most important things in their lives. And so I couldn't not be okay. I had to be okay. And even if I wasn't, I had to be. And so when you're at the top of that mountain, not only was it cold, but it was lonely. And to answer your question, Scott, yeah, absolutely. We had, I had achieved, quote unquote, what I perceived to be success: money in the bank, houses, boats, cars, beach houses, whatever I needed, whatever I wanted. And my wife and I built a beautiful dream home, still one of the nicest houses I've ever seen.
Oh, I love it.
And I was just lying on the couch one day looking up at the 24-foot ceilings, and I had this, it was like this just hit with every piece of energy in the universe that you can imagine of, I'm not happy, but more importantly, I'm not fulfilled. What is my purpose? Something really profound is missing. And I didn't know what that was. And so I sat with it. And I think a lot of people have that moment in their life. But because we're so busy and because we have so many responsibilities, we don't have the opportunity or the luxury to sit with it. And I had, I'd really just started meditating. And so I really meditated on it. And I really sat with it and said, what is this? And so I decided, like, maybe all of this that I have isn't the answer. And if not, then what is? Okay, let's go for a walk and let's start to learn all of the things that I had kind of like snubbed my nose at my whole life. All of these things that other people had done that I didn't find any value in. That included mindfulness, really focusing on meditation, different ways of biohacking, different ways of really tapping into mental health, physical health, and all of the things that, at that time, probably if you told me I'd be here today talking publicly about meditation, I would have like spit beer through my nose laughing at you. I wasn't that guy. But when I started to really figure out, like, there's something to it, when you start to listen to these people that society in many ways has shunned, you start to realize that maybe there was something there. And so before you know it, my wife and I, traveling the world and meeting with shaman and waking up in ashrams or in different places and studying different things and learning different cultures and religions and ways of being. And, psychedelics, we can get into that for Webdelics whenever you want, but that became a part of that journey. And that wasn't until about, it was a couple of years into it. It wasn't initially, but it was through the spiritual journey that I was willing to take, that I opened myself up to those conversations. And I have to be honest with you, Scott, initially my partners said, I think you lost your mind. And I said, well, maybe I found it. And even if I did lose it, maybe that's okay too. And so slowly now, here we come full circle 8 years later, so many of the people that were, I think, worried about me and thought I was crazy are now coming to me and asking about what we're doing. Tell me about this meditation. Tell me about fasting. Tell me about these cold plunges, mindfulness, and specifically and especially now that I've started putting it out there publicly about psychedelics.
There is so much in what you just said. Honestly, we could have a podcast episode that goes on for 5 hours, just digging into the richness of everything. Hey, let's do it. Okay, see you all tomorrow. Mike and I are going to be recording. But let's actually get to the main subject of this, which is the relationship of psychedelics and your professional transformation. And then I actually am going to want to swing back to some of the things that you said earlier, because I really believe you touched on two things that may be of concern to people listening to or watching this. First of all, the spouse and the relationship of the spouse to these massive professional transformations. And then number two, prestige. Being on the top of that hill doesn't mean you're just lonely with regards to the obligations that you have to other people, but the way people treat you in this world. And I want to talk about those in detail later. But how exactly did psychedelics end up on your radar? I've got to say, right, like going to meditate. Okay, cool. Psychedelics, huh?
Yeah. It's like it's that old adage, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. And I think very often the universe is the teacher. And I think we were ready. And to be completely honest, my wife and I were looking for help for someone that we really, really loved who was struggling with addiction and couldn't find it anywhere. None of the traditional methods worked at all. They cost a lot of money. They take a lot of time, a lot of energy from the family and from the person who's struggling. And I had someone who I consider my spiritual mentor say to me, you really need to learn about psychedelics. And my initial reaction was, no, like, we don't really need any more drugs. Like, that's kind of part of the problem here. And it was a very simple but profound statement. She said, they're not drugs, they're medicine. And I guess I'd spent enough time on this journey to say, okay, I'm willing, tell me more. I'm willing to learn. And it took all of about, a couple of days for me to read a few things and understand that, holy cow, there's something profound here. And so that was it. And so it was really in that context of trying to find something, because I was convinced that nothing existed in the United States that I knew about. I now know that it does, but it's all underground in the United States, unless we talk about something like ketamine. It's underground. And it was something that, when I started initially thinking about it, I was a product of, like, you're about the same age as I am, right? We're a product of the generation. And for the younger people who will be listening to this, they have to go back and Google it. But there was a commercial and there was a guy with an egg and he said, this is your brain. And he breaks the egg and he puts it in the skillet and it fries. He says, this is your brain on drugs. Any questions? And it scared me to death. And so, I paid my way through college and into law school with a microphone in my hand in North Jersey and New York City as the MC of some great nightclubs and parties that we probably crossed paths. And somehow I never got into the drug scene. I just don't know how. I guess there was part of my history and my family and the people around me that kept me away from that. But I never did that. And so I guess in many ways I was fortunate for that. But that was my perception, that these are very bad things. And, that was something that I initially had to get over. And I'm so grateful that I was willing to do it. And I still, like, if I see, my purpose here with regard to what we're doing with Webdelics, it's to help people understand that. I think once you get over that initial, that chasm there, then you're really able to see what's out there. And whether or not something like this agrees or aligns with you, that's another topic. But I think it's so important to educate people as to what really exists and what impact it can have on their lives or those of the lives of people that they love, that we're doing what we're doing.
So, Mike, this is something you weren't supposed to do, and that is stone cold bust me. I've been telling people on this podcast I'm only 26 years old. You busted me out as a liar. No, I thought people were believing me. But even more importantly than that, you stone cold busted that I used to be a club kid, and I was. And with that goes, we have something else in common, by the way, outside of being cool club kids, which is I thought I was the only club kid that wasn't doing any drugs, because, as you said, those commercials, for those of us that are in Generation X, even though I'm only 26, we vividly remember they put together all sorts of drugs, everything from crack to psychedelics to cannabis. And one of the fascinating things that I have found hosting this show has been the power of the language that we use to frame something. And that goes into many dimensions that we're about to get into. But one of those dimensions is, like you said a minute ago, what is a medicine versus what is a drug? Reframing, though, as I'm understanding it from the incredible guests like you, also goes as to what happens internally so many times when people have these medicinal journeys. So would you be willing to talk a little bit about how, if at all, your psychedelic experiences reframed your life?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. I love that question. So it was after really studying as much as we could, reading as much as we could, meeting as many people as we could. And I'm talking about, these aren't just like Joe the mushroom guy under the bridge to get you high kind of thing. These are people like, that have from around the world have helped people at a very, very meaningful level. And if you haven't been in this space, you almost can't comprehend it. But after reading enough about that and studying enough about that and learning enough about that, and working on myself as much as I had been in this self-discovery journey that I've been going through, I really came to respect the opportunity that these plant medicines provided and said, let's try this. We have to experience this to see what this does. And it wasn't necessarily for me. When we look at for me, psychedelics represent the opportunity to help with mental illness, whether that's depression or PTSD, suicidal ideations, etc. That's one category, or addictions of various forms, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, electronics, or different things like that, or improved personal performance, or like some people say, psycho-spiritual or shamanic journeys. And for me, it wasn't necessarily one of those categories. It was maybe a combination of each of them that I thought that I could use a little improvement in. And so that's what we did. And so I've had now a variety of different experiences. And I can tell you, I've tapped into parts of my consciousness that I did not know existed, that I did not know that I could access. And I've been provided with, I call them downloads. My wife, when we talk about it, I think she refers to them as answers. But I've gotten messages and guidance that I've never received in my life, I believe in coaching and mentoring. So I've had some amazing coaches and mentors in my life, personally, professionally, spiritually. And from any of them, some of the best advice that I've gotten doesn't come close to what I received from what's inside of me already. And I think that in many ways that these plant medicines gave me the opportunity to get those answers, those downloads.
I can't let that series of statements go. I just can't. When you say that you're accessing these parts of your consciousness, what does that mean exactly? And what is it like when you get these answers or these downloads?
It's like, it's like the Supreme Court's definition of obscenity. We don't know what it is, but we'll know it when we see it. It's hard to describe if you haven't been through that experience, but I can tell you it's, for me, it eliminated a lot of the fears that I had, specifically any fears of death, not necessarily my own, but those that I love, any fear of abandonment or loss, whether that be personally, financially, materialistically, and the recognition of oneness, this incredible oneness in the universe or universes that we're all a part of, and this connectedness. And I'd never seen that. I'd never felt it that way. And it really made me, I think in many ways I was working toward being a heart-centered individual. This really amplified that opportunity for me.
This is a perfect chance for me to step in and go back to something that I mentioned a little earlier that you touched on when you were talking about your career as an attorney. That is prestige, but really prestige is part of a package of things that are united under an umbrella that you just discussed. And I think one of the things that people fear, I know that scares me even thinking about all of this. And it scared me, by the way, when I left my own career as an attorney behind. And I know a lot of folks who might be feeling trapped and unhappy, that there's got to be a better way for themselves. That is the fear of losing those exact things. Money, prestige. One of the legal jobs I had, I was second in command of an entire government agency. I mean, I snapped my fingers and said, get this done. And people jumped. Right. It got done. Right. Now I have to do a lot more than snap my fingers to get things done in this world. Right. Like I experienced that as a loss. Is it really? How did you come to terms with that as your career began to move in a different direction? Because your place in life now is different.
Yeah. It came from a place of changing what you value. And I came to value time more than money. Money is still extremely important because it gives us an opportunity to do with our time what we'd like to do and to help others do the same thing. But to the extent that I was spending my time in certain ways, I really wanted to focus on the ability to do that. And so it's that, you make a good point, because we do have that fear, especially if we're losing. We see this with athletes a lot of times when they, when they play their final game and they walk off into the sunset. 1, 2, 3, 5 years later, losing quote unquote their identity. They often struggle because that is their identity. And we all have our identities. And I think, unfortunately, we attach those identities to our careers and our professions. And so for me, I was able to do it because I was able to step back far enough to recognize that being an attorney wasn't who I was. It was just something that I did. All of the other things, the other businesses that I started and worked with, they weren't who I was. They were just things that I did. And so I could take really who I was and go with it wherever I wanted. And so that's what we're doing now.
I have a friend who worked as a coach to a lot of very famous celebrities. And one of the things I'll never forget that she told me about that experience, and they included athletes, since you mentioned that particular group, that a lot of times, like you said, once that last game was over, they hadn't developed a core. And so they had nothing. Their entire self collapsed. Am I hearing you say in a way that your psychedelic journeys helped you connect to your core?
Yeah, I think not just to my core, but to the core, or what often people refer to as source. That, I'm just a small 21 trillion group of cells floating around here in this dimension that's a part of something much bigger. And, I think that recognizing that that's really what's going on, that I'm just really a part of something much bigger, makes it easy to be a part of that, whatever it might be, wherever we go. And so, yes. And when you start to recognize that that's what's really going on, the idea that I was, an attorney, or I was a plumber, or I was a policeman, and this is all I did in life, and this is all I can ever do, and I need to do this in order to be happy, really starts to become so much more meaningless.
I can't believe it, but as of the recording of this episode, you're the first person who has really brought this to the fore, even if it was indirectly, and that is the relationship of the family to the psychedelic experience, particularly when we're talking about professional freedom and moving our lives in directions that are closer, for lack of better language on my end, to the source. Look, I'll be candid with you. A lot of the fears that people might have around making these changes, whether it's going on a psychedelic journey or changing their lives, are centered around the impact of this on their family. Even if it's just a spouse, and not just a spouse, because a spouse is many times the most important person in your life. What would you say to people that are feeling some hesitation inside around that?
Yeah, I would say to absolutely educate yourself. That's why Webdelics is so important. Educate yourself to the benefits of psychedelics, because there's this incredible misperception that goes on in society every day by hundreds of millions of people that I can't do that because of the impact that it might have on my family. I cannot do psilocybin. Like, that's a Schedule I drug. There's no way. Well, maybe if I go to Colorado or Oregon where it's legal, maybe, but not really. It's so far-fetched. Let me have 3 martinis at lunch and then 3 more at dinner, and that's the way it is. And then watch the Super Bowl and get faceplant drunk or things like that. That's all okay, because when we talk, going back to your definition of drugs, it's been very conveniently described in the nomenclature of our society of what drugs are. We don't talk about sugar or alcohol or tobacco, but we talk about psilocybin, ayahuasca, and iboga, and 5-MeO, and those things as if they're bad. So what I would say is educate yourself. And then I think once you do that, like I did, what you'll find is that experience has an exponentially higher likelihood of improving the quality of your life and your family's life than all of the things that you've been led to believe that you're actually doing right now.
Mike, what is your life like now?
It's amazing. I'm talking to you from Michael Singer's property. I'm about to go into a session with him and the rest of the people here. I'm working with Webdelics and some of the greatest people on earth who are impacting humanity in ways I couldn't believe. It's all of the success that I had before. If you want to go back to material success and money and all of that, it's all of that I had before, exponentially amplified. So much more physically, emotionally, spiritually successful, on top of, what I initially thought was important. So the short answer is it's incredible.
Do you ever look back and say, what if?
Not really, but if you want me to do that now and think about it, I think I think I would have missed out on so much. I think they're for so many of us, if you're a fan of Joseph Campbell, there's something called the hero's journey. And so many of us get that knock, and whether or not we answer it is another issue. But I think, if I hadn't answered that knock, not that my life would have been bad at all, but it would have been very different, and it wouldn't have been nearly what it is today.
Look, and I've got to be really candid with you here, and be candid with me too, please. It might have been bad. I mean, one thing about the profession of attorneys, especially in the trial space, is that I knew and have known and still do know a lot of lifetime trial attorneys who, because of the stress of being on trial and the adversarial nature of litigation over and over again for years, end up with severe alcohol problems, with severe familial problems, smoking addictions, all of these things that you're talking about. And it's hard to, and early deaths and all sorts of weird health dysfunctions. And it's hard to believe, and I'm not saying, I don't want to have a broad brush that I'm painting the entire world with, but I've seen it enough that I notice it. That was part of why I moved out of litigation. So would it maybe have been bad?
It could have, yeah, absolutely could have been. And you're right. And I echo everything that you said. I've seen the same things, whether it's judges, lawyers, prosecutors, politicians, all of them struggling. And, it's like nobody has the answer because everybody's looking in the same place, which isn't the right place. And it's accepted and tolerated. And now my goal, when I go back, people, they started seeing what I'm putting out there on social media, hearing podcasts that I'm on. And it's amazing, the calls and the texts and the messages that I get from my colleagues, from attorneys, from other professionals that are saying, tell me more. Because I've been there like you have. So, maybe I have that credibility as a professional, as an attorney, to say, I know where you are. I was there. And that's, I had the opportunity to escape, and I did. And this is what I've learned since then.
I've got to raise one other issue. You're touching on so many. Again, this will have to be a 5-hour conversation sometime. But it goes as to the fear that many people in established, prestigious professions have of the judgment of others. When I left, I was afraid of that. I remember walking into the door of a party of former litigators that I worked with when I did my first entrepreneurial journey, and my hands were shaking as I turned that knob because I was afraid everyone would laugh at me. Did you experience any of that, or has this connection to source eradicated that? And if so, how do you deal with that, particularly in the psychedelic space, of all spaces, where it is controversial?
I never had it, Scott, and I can understand how people would have it because I get it. We're social creatures, and to be ostracized by, our community outside of where we're comfortable, not only will we be uncomfortable, but, oh no, we could die. That's the way our minds work. When you look all the way back to the primitive part of the brain. I think once you've done enough work with yourself, once you've spoken to enough people that are able to help you understand, you realize that that's not the reality. And so, no, the short answer is I don't have that fear. In fact, I welcome it because I want to have these conversations. And I'll give you a quick example. A couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, one of my law partners was nominated for to be the president of the Bar Association. And he asked me if I would MC the event. And I said, sure, but if I do it, I'm going to do it my way. And he said, I know, that's why I'm asking you to do it. And I did. And I went up there and I spoke in front of, 400 lawyers, judges, politicians, and everyone else. And I did all of the traditional niceties, but then I also incorporated a lot of the conversations, not as much as about psychedelics, but starting to lean into it and the importance of, self-care in terms of mindfulness and all of these things that were outside of the traditional way of being. And I can tell you, I was shocked by the response. It was amazing. People just really, for days and weeks and months, were saying, I just loved what you had to say, and I never thought about things that way. And one of the judges told me that she had never considered meditation, but since that speech, she took one of the cards that I handed out to the crowd and puts it on the door of her chambers, and now meditates a few minutes a day every day. And it was like, there's really something here. So I don't have that fear. I don't know what it is, because there's really nothing to be afraid of. I don't really care what people think at this point.
To me, that is professional freedom.
Yeah.
Mike, talk to us a little bit about how you got involved with Webdelics. People need to know.
That was a gift from the universe. I was involved with Nobody Studios, which is a venture studio that I'm really excited to be a part of. I got into Nobody Studios early on, and one of the first companies that Nobody Studios created, in addition to a company called Ovations, but spelled with a Z, is Webdelics. And I think because of my journey and everything that I'm up to in the world personally with my consulting company and the way that I work with individuals and groups personally, I was approached by some of the people at Nobody Studios to talk about the interest that I might have in working specifically and closely with Webdelics in the leadership role. And I said, absolutely. So, once I learned, I said, tell me a little bit about it. And basically, it's the WebMD for psychedelics. We're going to provide consumer-based education for the world. We're going to be the number one trusted source of psychedelic information. And I said, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to help educate people because, and I'll make it clear that my role. So I gladly accepted the role of Chief Strategy Officer, putting everything together. And, I want to make it clear that this isn't an effort to push psychedelics on everyone. Mm-hmm. What it really is an opportunity to educate them the same way that we've been educated about aspirin and tobacco and alcohol and everything else that kind of like guides our society. This is an opportunity for us to really provide people with the education and information that they need to make an informed decision as to whether or not this can improve the quality of their life or the quality of the life of someone they love.
Well, and I've got to say that commitment to education is part of what appealed to me. I don't think either of us at this age and stage in our lives are interested in just being a cheerleader for some BS, right? Yeah. We are here to tell the truth. And speaking of truth, you've shared a lot of it today. If there is one final takeaway that you would like to leave the audience with, Mike, what would that be?
Follow your bliss, whatever that might be. And whatever it takes to figure that out, if it takes an hour, a day, a week, a month, or a year, whatever you need to do, whether it's mindfulness, meditation, whatever you need to do to figure out what that bliss is, find it. And to the extent that you can, with everything that's in your being, follow it.
Find your bliss. I'm hearing a little bit of Joseph Campbell there. And for those of you who don't
favorites.
Know, he's incredible, right?
Joseph Campbell, I so much of what he's done is so profound.
It truly, truly is. And for those of you who might not know who Joseph Campbell is, look him up, read, and you will understand when I say that Mike Mumola has gone on the hero's journey. He truly has. Mike, thank you so much for being on the show today. For those of you who are listening or watching, keep tuning in. In upcoming episodes, we're going to be discussing everything from how to prepare for your first psychedelic experience to psychedelics and yoga. There are so many topics that we are going to be covering in such richness that I get all hot and bothered even just thinking about it. And if you enjoyed today's episode and want to learn more, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review and a comment if you're on YouTube, and then tell everyone that you know who you think might be interested in this about what we're doing. Share the links, pass it on your social media. And don't forget to follow Webdelics on our various social media platforms, TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. And make sure that you go to our website, Webdelics.com. That's Webdelics.com. And sign up to our blog where you can get the most up-to-date, accurate, and unbiased information about psychedelics and plant medicines on the web. And then be sure to come back, tune in for another episode of the Webdelics podcast.